Hi everyone and welcome back to Chrono Productions, and today we are back with another Marvel Champions video. Quick update on the expansion that was supposed to be out a while ago now and is still not here. The website that I order cards from has updated their release date to be October 29th. I am trying to get a copy from overseas because it is available in the UK, but I promise you guys whenever I get the product, then we'll make the video. But until I have it, I can't make it, unfortunately. Anyway, today we are going to be talking about another deck of mine. This is going to be the Iron Legion deck showcase, which is an Iron Man Justice deck. Iron Man is an interesting hero in the way that he plays. He's a little bit different from some of the other heroes. I want to talk about that in a minute. So let's just jump right into it. So first up, we have the Iron Man hero card, which you can already see on the screen. So Iron Man has a thwart of 2, an attack of 1, and a defense of 1. And his effect says you get +1 hand size for each tech upgrade you control, up to a maximum hand size of 7. He starts with a hand size of 1 and hit points of 9. So both in terms of hit points and in hand size, Iron Man is a relatively vulnerable hero in the early game. His base stats are not great, and his effect on the Iron Man side sounds really powerful until you realize he starts with a hand size of 1, but that's only on his hero side. His alter ego side is a little bit different, and we'll talk about that next. Iron Man's alter ego side is significantly stronger. He has a recovery of 3, which is pretty standard. His hand size is 6 in his alter ego side, so you're only suffering in hand size potentially on his hero side, and only if you haven't played enough upgrades yet. And we'll get to the upgrades in a little bit. He still has hit points of 9 on his alter ego side, which is really low. We didn't talk about that too much with the hero side, but his base hit points at 9 is one of the lowest in the game, maybe the lowest. I'd have to double check the stats on that one. But 9 is not a lot of hit points, and it does present a problem sometimes. But his effect is really strong. It's called Futurist. It says, action, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, add 1 to your hand, and discard the others. Limit once per round. So once per turn, basically, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, select 1 of them and put it into your hand, and put the others in the discard pile. This does get through your deck a lot faster, which can be a problem with acceleration counters on the scheme, but the ability to put more cards in your hand is invaluable in this deck, obviously, because even with 2 to 3 upgrades, your hand side is like 4, like 3 or 4, which is not great on the hero side. So you have to find ways to compensate for that, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Okay, so the next card we're going to talk about is one of his many upgrades in the deck. This is one of the cards that increases your hand size when you play it. We're going to talk about all the upgrades, just one right after another. There is one of these in the deck. It's a 2-cost upgrade that is called Arc Reactor. It's a very simple ability. It says hero action, exhaust Arc Reactor, ready Iron Man. So basically you can use this to get a second activation, usually of your thwart on Iron Man, which is 2 base. So thwarting for 4 every turn by itself with this card is really, really strong, and there's lots of ways to amplify that as you go through the deck. But Arc Reactor, probably the most important upgrade in the deck. It's relatively low cost, and it allows you to thwart twice with Iron Man in the same turn, which is really, really strong. Remember, this is a Justice deck, so the whole point is to be able to thwart a lot and take threat off of the schemes that the villain is playing. Okay, so the next upgrade we're going to talk about is called Rocket Boots. It's a 1-cost upgrade. It does add a hit point to Iron Man, which is also helpful. Instead of 9 hit points, you have a max of 10 hit points. There are 2 of these in the deck, and you can have them both on the field at the same time, which means each one of them will give you 1 more hit point. So if you have 2 of them, you get 2 more hit points. This upgrade is really important, though, for its second ability, which says Hero Action, exhaust Rocket Boots and spend a blue resource, which is, you can see the blue resource icon on the bottom of this particular card. Gain the aerial trait until the end of the turn. The aerial trait is something that Iron Man has a couple different uses for in the deck. It by itself doesn't do anything, but by having it, it allows you to play other cards that are in the deck more efficiently. We'll talk more about those as we go on. So Rocket Boots, really important upgrade. Again, 2 of them in the deck. Very, very useful. Okay, so the next upgrade we're going to talk about is called Mark V Armor. It's a 3-cost upgrade, which is a little steeper, but the effect is really, really good. It's really simple, but it just says you get plus 6 hit points. The upgrades compensate for Iron Man's inherent weakness. He's a hand size of 1 and a hit points of 9, but as you add upgrades, he gets more hand size and more hit points. So that's the whole point. That's the whole thing with Iron Man, is as you're playing through these upgrades, you're compensating for his initial weakness and upgrading him to the point where he can be a massive threat in the game. There is only 1 Mark V armor in the deck, as you might imagine, because it's such a strong effect. It does cost 3 though, so it is costly. Okay, so the next upgrade we're going to talk about is called the Mark V helmet. It's a 1-cost upgrade, so really, really cheap. It doesn't give any hit points. But it says hero action, and this counts as a thwart. Exhaust the Mark V helmet, remove 1 threat from a scheme. If you have the aerial trait, remove 1 threat from each scheme instead. So one of the ways Iron Man can use the aerial trait, if he has this card out, can, instead of just tapping it to remove a threat from a single scheme, remove 1 threat from every scheme that's out. Okay, so the next upgrade we're going to talk about is called Powered Gauntlets. It's a 2-cost upgrade. There are 2 of them in the deck, and you can have them both out at the same time. It says hero action attack, exhaust Powered Gauntlets, deal 1 damage to an enemy, or 2 damage instead if you have the aerial trait. So again, the aerial trait just amplifying what the upgrades are allowing yourselves to do. These are really, really good for removing stun tokens on your hero. If you are trying to get a big attack in, but you're stunned, and but you don't want to use your basic attack because you want to thwart with this deck usually, these are really, really good ways to just discard the stun and then play your big attack card, which we'll talk about some of those right now. Okay, so the next card we're going to talk about is called Repulsor Blast. It's a 1-cost event. It says hero action. It counts as an attack. Deal 1 damage to an enemy and discard the top 5 cards of your deck. Pause. For each printed yellow resource discarded this way, deal 2 additional damage to that enemy. So the way this works is it's 1 cost for 1 damage, period. That happens no matter what. You discard the top 5 cards of your deck, and any cards that have a yellow printed resource on them, and I'll show you the yellow resource on another card. For each one of those yellow resources that you see on those cards, add an additional 2 damage. So the max damage you're going to get 1 damage, period. 1 cost for 1 damage is pretty pitiful. However, 1 cost for the maximum, which is 13 damage, believe it or not, is insane. There's no other card in the game that can do that much damage for 1 cost. So Repulsor Blast, risk reward kind of thing, but if you get it to go off just right, it's going to destroy something. There are also 3 Repulsor Blasts in the deck, so it's a pretty easy card to draw and get a hold of and play as often as you want, really. Okay, so the next card we're going to talk about is called Supersonic Punch. It's a 2-cost event. There are 2 of these in the deck, and it just says hero action, deal 4 damage to an enemy. 2 costs for 4 damage is not amazing, but it's not awful. However, it says 8 damage instead if you have the aerial trait. So again, using the Rocket Boots to gain the aerial trait, suddenly this card does 8 damage. 2 cost for 8 damage is really, really strong. And this is one of the ways in which the deck finishes things off. This is a great way to finish off the villain or get rid of a bothersome minion. Okay, so the next card is War Machine, who is the signature ally in the Iron Man deck. It's a 4-cost ally, so kind of steep. It has 1 thwart and 2 attack, and it has 4 health. And each one of these thwart and attack is 1 consequential damage, so he can get 4 activations off, which is pretty strong. And his effect can be useful in the right situation. It says action, exhaust War Machine and deal 2 damage to him, so you can only do this twice if you don't attack it or thwart at all with him. Deal 1 damage to each enemy. So it's a little bit of a mini board wipe, sort of what we saw with Squirrel Girl in the last video, but a little more costly and a little more not as repeatable. So, but War Machine overall, really most of the time, he's a 4-cost ally who can attack for 8 damage total, which isn't bad, especially since if you want to just attack for 6 damage and block with him on his final activation, which can be really good because Iron Man is really squishy. He's the only ally in the hero deck that you can use, so it is a useful card. Doesn't see as much action as you might think. Iron Man will definitely see more action in the War Machine deck, but that's another topic for another day. Okay, so the next card we're going to talk about is a 3-cost support. It is Pepper Potts. Pepper Potts has a really interesting ability. It says, exhaust Pepper Potts, generate the resources of the top card in your discard pile. Most of the time it's going to generate you 1 resource, which is what most of these cards have printed on them. There are a couple cards that give you 2 resources, but the odds of getting those at the top of your discard pile are relatively low, and for a 3-cost support, that's all she does. It's not amazing, it's not bad, but she doesn't see a lot of play when I use the deck. Okay, so the next card is called Stark Tower. It's a 2-cost support. It's in similar vein as Pepper Potts. It says exhaust Stark Tower and choose a player, so you can choose one of your teammates. That player returns the topmost tech upgrade in their discard pile to their hand. Most of the time you're going to use this on yourself. What makes this card almost objectively better than Pepper Potts is, 1, it only costs 2 instead of 3, and generating a resource is not as good as putting the card back into your hand, because then you can play the card that was in your discard pile. So if someone gets rid of your Arc Reactor, Stark Tower is a great way to bring it back if you can get a hold of it. Okay, so that is all 15 cards in the Identity deck. So those are mandatory whenever you play as Iron Man. The rest of this is going to be the Justice cards, and we're going to start with the allies. The first Justice ally we're going to talk about is one of my personal favorites. I've been using this card ever since he came in the base set, and I haven't taken him out of a Justice deck yet, I don't think. It's a 4-cost ally, so kind of steep cost. It's Daredevil. He has 2 thwart and 2 attack, and 3 activations. So 6 thwart, 6 attack, or some combination of the 2. But his effect is what makes him really strong. One of the principles of this deck is being able to thwart and deal damage at the same time. Finding ways to remove threat, and then by virtue of removing threat, have cards in the deck that also deal damage to an enemy or the villain. And you'll see that as we go on. And Daredevil is the first and prime example. After Daredevil thwarts, deal 1 damage to an enemy. That's just what he does. Whenever he thwarts, you also deal damage. So, even though his attack is 2, by thwarting, you get the 2 thwart and essentially 1 attack in addition. And so on 3 activations, that's 6 thwart and 3 attack. That's pretty good. There is only one of these in the deck. It has to be only one in the deck, but when you get a hold of him, he can be really, really strong. So the next ally we're going to talk about is called Wiccan. He's a 2-cost ally with 1 thwart and 1 attack. He has 3 health, so 3 activations. It says, after Wiccan thwarts, discard the top card of the encounter deck. That's the villain deck. For each boost icon discarded this way, deal 1 damage to an enemy. Boost icons are when the villain attacks or schemes, they reveal the top card of their deck, and there's a little boost icon at the bottom of every villain card that it is basically a number of little triangles, and you add the number of boost icons to the villain's attack or scheme, whichever one they decided to go with, and that's how you know how much damage or threat counters to place on whatever the villain is activating for. So the way Wiccan works is when he thwarts, it's kind of similar to Daredevil, same principle. Discard the top card of the encounter deck, which gets rid of a card from the encounter deck, which is rarely bad. And it also says deal for each boost icon on the card discarded, deal 1 damage to an enemy. Now, There are cards in the villain deck that don't have boost icons, so you could get 0 damage for this, and he only has 3 activations, and 1 thwart each is only 3 thwart. So it's not amazing. It's not as good as Daredevil, I don't think, but he does only cost 2, and it achieves the same principle as Daredevil, which is really, really nice. So the next Justice ally we're going to talk about is called Quake. You might recognize Quake from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., or some of the Marvel shorts that are on Disney+. Quake is a 2-cost ally with 1 thwart and 2 attack. So her thwart is not great, and she only has 2 activations. She only has 2 HP. But you're not using Quake for her activations. Her effect can be really, really strong. It says, after a minion schemes, exhaust Quake, deal 2 damage to that minion. So in addition to the villain scheming, if there are minions out on the board, they also can scheme and add threat to the main scheme. So Quake, anytime they do that, you can exhaust Quake and just deal 2 damage to them, and that does not cause Quake any damage. So she doesn't have to take consequential damage from her effect, which means that as long as minions keep scheming, Quake can keep using this effect over and over again. And you don't care that much if minions scheme, especially if they're weaker minions, because the whole deck removes threat anyway. So the next card is not only a flavor win because it has Iron Man on the card, but it's also really, really strong. We'll talk about why. So it's a 1-cost event called Clear the Area. It is a thwart action. It says remove 2 threat from a scheme. If this removes the last threat on that scheme, draw 1 card. We've already talked about how Iron Man has a bit of a hand size issue from time to time because of the way his upgrades work. You have to have upgrades to have cards in your hand, and that's really important. But if you can draw cards whilst playing, that really increases your chances of having a longer turn and having a more meaningful turn, regardless of how many upgrades are on the field. And Clear the Area really helps you do that. It is only 2 threat, so it has to finish off a scheme. But the way Iron Man works is that his thwart is his highest stat, and if you can get a couple upgrades going, he can basic thwart down a scheme to 2 or less, and then you just drop Clear the Area and draw a card. I also put 3 Clear the Area in the deck, so it's pretty easy to get a hold of. This card combos really well with the next card we're going to talk about. So the next card is a 0-cost event, reminiscent of my Spider-Man deck, called Turn the Tide. It's actually an attack action. It says, after your hero thwarts and removes all threat from a scheme, deal 3 damage to an enemy. 0 cost for 3 damage is really, really strong. And the way this works is Clear the Area counts as your hero thwarting. So if you clear the area and you already have Turn the Tide in your hand, you can just drop as many Turn the Tides as you have. I put 3 of them in the deck. You can just drop as many Turn the Tides as you have and deal 3 damage for each one, and then still draw the card off of Clear the Area. The one thing you can't do is you can't play Turn the Tide on the draw if you draw it. Turn the Tide has to already be in your hand when you play Clear the Area, or when you thwart and remove a threat from this game. You don't have to combo Turn the Tide with Clear the Area. It's just drawing the card and dealing 3 damage really, really creates a nice combo, and it's one of the principles of the deck. So the next card we're going to talk about is called Heroic Intuition. It's a 2-cost upgrade. It does not increase your hand size because Iron Man says you have to have tech upgrades to increase your hand size. But it is really important. It says play on it under any player's control. So you can give this to a teammate if you so choose. But you're probably going to want one for yourself first. It says max 1 per player. It just says your hero gets +1 thwart. So I put 2 of these in the deck. You play 1 for yourself, and then later on, if you feel like you need to, you can give 1 to someone else as well. So what it does is it changes Iron Man's base thwart from 2 to 3, and then so every time he uses his basic thwart, he removes 3 threat from a scheme. If you have the Arc Reactor out, suddenly you can tap the Arc Reactor to ready Iron Man and remove another 3 threat from a scheme. So that's 6 threat just from using your basic abilities, which can be really, really strong. Heroic Intuition is one of the more important cards in the deck, and as soon as you see it, you're probably going to want to play it. Okay, so the next card we're going to talk about is called Stealth Strike. It's a 3-cost event, so it is a little pricey, but it says hero action, it counts as an attack, deal 4 damage to an enemy. If that enemy is defeated by this attack, remove 2 threat from a scheme. So it's sort of the opposite of Turn the Tide. You'll usually want to use this, you almost have to use this on a minion. Deal 4 damage to a minion. If you finish off the minion with this card, you also remove 2 threat from a scheme. So it goes back to that balance between dealing damage and removing threat, and finding a hybrid deck between the two of them, which is, again, the whole purpose of the deck. There are 2 of these in the deck. It doesn't get played a ton, but when it does get played, it's a power move. It just gives you that much more threat removal and manages to destroy a minion. So really, really powerful card when it comes up. Okay, so the next card we're going to talk about is called Interrogation Room. It's a 1-cost support. You can only have 1 of these out per player. There are 2 in the deck. This one you have to play on yourself. You can't give this to a teammate, but it is a really powerful effect. It says, after you defeat a minion, exhaust Interrogation Room, remove 1 threat from a scheme. So this pairs really well with cards like Stealth Strike and Quake. Basically, whenever you're defeating minions, you just tap this, remove a threat from a scheme. So you're already getting rid of the minions, and this helps further your plan along. And this stays on the field. There are no counters to this. It's just as long as you can keep it on the field, it stays. Anytime a minion dies, it is limited to once per phase, but it's really, really handy. So the next card we're going to talk about is called Agile Flight. It's a 3-cost event. Again, so a little pricey. But it says play only if your identity has the aerial trait. So you have to use rocket boots for this to get the aerial trait in order to play this card. But when you do, it's really, really useful. It says hero action, it counts as a thwart. Remove a total of up to 5 threat from among schemes as you choose. So if there are multiple schemes out, you can go, okay, there's 1 on that one, I'll take 1 off that one. There's 2 on that one, I'll take 2 off that one. You can clear the board of schemes, or if there's just the main scheme left, this is a 3-cost card that bombs for 5 threat, which is pretty good. Again, you do have to have the aerial trait, so it requires some setup, but worst case scenario, if you don't have the aerial trait, you can just discard this card to play something else. There's only 1 of these in the deck, but when it comes up and when it's useful, man, it can really pack a punch. Okay, so the next card we're not going to spend a ton of time on. If you watched my Spider-Man leadership deck, you're familiar with this type of card. It's the Power of Justice. You can only have 2 in the deck, and I did put 2 in. It says when you discard this card, it says double the number of resources this card generates while paying for a Justice card. So as long as you're discarding this card to play a Justice card, it counts as 2 resources instead of 1. That's all the card does, but it is really, really useful. And like I said, I did put 2 of them in the deck, in this deck as well. Okay, so the next card is called Determination. You can only have 1 of these in your deck. It's a relatively new card. I think it's really interesting. It's similar to the Power of Justice. Its only effect is when it's discarded to pay a cost. But it says after you spend this card, remove 1 threat from the main scheme. So by spending this card to play another card, you remove a threat from a scheme. So it gives you some benefit for using this card to play other cards. I haven't had a ton of time to play around with this card yet. Like I said, it's relatively new. I think it's a really cool idea. I hope they do something similar with aggression and protection, but Justice needed this a little bit more than the other cards, the other aspects, and I'm really glad to see it available. Okay, so that does it for all the Justice cards. So now we're going to get into the basic cards, starting with the allies, and the first ally is Ironheart. This is a bit of a flavor win more than anything, but it is useful in what it does. It's a 2-cost ally with 1 thwart, 1 attack, 2 activations, so 2 health. All of that is just bonus for the fact that it says after you play Ironheart from your hand, draw 1 card. This is, again, just a really handy way to deal with Iron Man's hand size problem. Yes, you do have to discard cards to play it, but it gives you an ally on the board and then refunds some of the cost, which is really, really nice. It's a really useful card. And having an ally on the board by itself is worth 2 cost. And the fact that she replaces one of those cards and you could draw something really helpful is a big benefit. Okay, so the next basic card we're going to talk about is an upgrade. It's a 2-cost upgrade called Enhanced Awareness. It comes in with 3 mental counters, and it says exhaust Enhanced Awareness and remove 1 mental counter from it. Generate a blue resource. So it's 2 cost to get 1 blue resource every turn. The primary use for this is being able to always pay the blue cost for rocket boots, because that aerial trait can be really important. But when you need it to provide an extra resource for a card, you can use it for that too. But the main reason is to make sure you can always have a blue resource, because you want to fill the deck with as much yellow resource as you can to amplify the damage of Repulsor Blast. So this is a great way to put a source on the board for a blue resource when you need the aerial trait to come through for you. So the next basic card we're going to talk about is called Hit and Run. It's a 3-cost event that counts as both an attack and a thwart. It's not anything amazing. It's pretty basic. It says deal 2 damage to an enemy, remove 2 threat from a scheme. This goes back to the basic principle of the deck, which is dealing damage and removing threat at the same time. It also has a printed yellow resource, so if you ever discard it for Repulsor Blast, there's another 2 damage. It's just a great filler card. There's only 1 in the deck. Just a handy card when it's necessary. So the next card we're going to talk about is called Genius. If you watch my Spider-Man Leadership deck showcase, you'll recognize this card. It just says it's max 1 per deck. It generates 2 blue resource when you pay for a card. I included this one and the yellow resource one. I did not include the red resource one because this deck kind of revolves around yellow and blue resource. Blue resource for triggering the aerial trait, and yellow resource for the Repulsor Blast card. So I did include the blue one, and I also included the yellow one, which we'll talk about right now. So the yellow resource one is called Energy. It is also max 1 per deck, as you might imagine. It generates 2 yellow resource. The cool thing about this card in this particular deck is that the way Repulsor Blast is worded, it says deal additional 2 damage for each printed yellow resource on the cards you discard, which means that if you ever discard this card with Repulsor Blast, this is worth 4 damage by itself. So even if this is the only card with a printed yellow resource you discard with Repulsor Blast, that's 1 cost for 5 damage, which is really, really strong. And that is the Iron Man Justice Iron Legion deck showcase. I really hope you guys enjoyed the deck. I really enjoyed talking about it. It was really the first deck I ever built. And I've just been modifying it as time goes on. So this is the current iteration. It'll probably get even better as time goes on. But it's one of my favorites. I really, really hope that I get to stick with it for a long time to come. The next video, hopefully, will be the War Machine deck showcase. The basic one. The one that is coming out hopefully next Friday. Obviously, there have been some delays with like the Mad Titan expansion, which I promise I will get to that video as soon as I have the product in my hands. I'm really, really hoping to be able to get the War Machine hero deck on time next week, but if I don't, more than likely the next deck showcase you will see will be something a little different. Let's put it that way. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, see ya!